The cowboy who saved her from outlaws, only to become the one she couldn't escape. On the dusty plains of the far west, where the wind whispered secrets through the tall grass and the sun bleached the very color from the land, stood a solitary ranch. It belonged to Alara, a woman forged in the crucible of loss, now the steward of her late husband's legacy. Every morning, she would rise before the sun, pour a cup of strong, black coffee, and sit on the porch, gazing at the endless expanse where the sky kissed the horizon. A shadow of grief lingered in her eyes, but beneath it burned an unyielding resolve. Her heart ached with memories, but her spirit was as unyielding as the steel in a blacksmith's forge. Ilara's days unfolded with a quiet rhythm. The early rise, the demanding work in the fields, the endless mending of fences, and the solitary evenings warmed by a crackling fire. She had learned these tasks not just for survival, but as a way to keep the memory of her husband, Jack, alive. When he died, he hadn't taken their dreams with him. Instead, Ilara had shouldered them, determined to see them to fruition. One evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged peaks of the distant mountains, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and fading gold, an unsettling feeling crept over Ilara. Her heart quickened its pace, a primal instinct warning of approaching danger. She reached for the rifle she kept close and scanned the vast expanse of her land. In the fading light, a cloud of dust billowed in the distance, growing larger with alarming speed. Riders. Her blood ran cold. Outlaws. The very kind of whispers in town warned against, men who knew no mercy. Ilara sprang into action, bolting the heavy wooden doors and latching the windows. She hefted the rifle, the cold steel familiar comfort in her trembling hands, and checked the cylinder. Fear clawed at her throat, but fierce defiance bloomed in her chest. She wouldn't run. This was her land, her home, the tangible link to everything she held dear. She would stand her ground. Come what may, the band of riders, led by a gaunt, hard-eyed man whose face was a road map of past cruelties, thundered closer. His voice, rough as gravel, echoed across the stillness as he bellowed for Ilara to come out, threatening to burn her ranch to the ground. Ilara remained silent, her grip tightening on the rifle. They wanted more than just her land. They wanted to extinguish the very fire of her spirit. Then, as if summoned by a desperate prayer, another rider appeared on the crest of a small hill. He was a stranger, a solitary figure cloaked in an aura of mystery. His name, she would later learn, was Cassidy. He wore a long, dark duster that billowed in the wind, and his face was shadowed beneath the brim of a worn hat, revealing only a hint of a rugged jawline and eyes that held a profound stillness. The leader of the outlaws laughed, dismissing the lone newcomer as insignificant, but Cassidy proved them wrong. There was a coiled tension in his posture, a quiet confidence that spoke of a life lived on the edge. With a speed that belied his seemingly relaxed demeanor, he drew his revolver. A sharp crack echoed through the air, and the outlaw leader slumped in his saddle. Chaos erupted among the remaining riders. Cassidy didn't hesitate, his movements fluid and deadly. One by one, the outlaws fell, their surprised cries swallowed by the vast emptiness. In the span of a few heartbeats, it was over. The dust settled, leaving a scene of stark finality under the twilight sky. Ilara cautiously unbolted the door, her breath catching her throat as she looked at Cassidy. Her heart still hammered against her ribs, but a fragile seed of hope had taken root in her chest. Cassidy turned to her, his face etched with a weariness that seemed to go beyond the immediate conflict, but his eyes held a surprising gentleness. "Are you all right?" Cassidy's voice was low, carrying a hint of a drawl. Ilara could only nod, her voice momentarily lost. I owe you my life. Thank you." Cassidy offered a curt nod, his gaze sweeping over the fallen outlaws before returning to her. He made to remount his horse, but Ilara found her voice. "Wait, where are you going? You should come inside. You must be tired." Cassidy hesitated for a moment, his gaze lingering on the distant horizon, before he nodded slowly. He tied his reins to the porch railing and followed Ilara inside. She offered him food, the simple fare tasting like a feast after the terror of the evening, and tended to a shallow cut on his arm. She moved with a quiet efficiency, but a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Who was this man, And why had he risked his life for a stranger? In the days that followed, an unspoken bond formed between Alara and Cassidy. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, his voice was laced with quiet wisdom that resonated deep within Alara. His observations were sharp, his insights profound. He carried an air of solitude, a man wrestling with burdens unseen. Alara found herself confiding in him, sharing stories of Jack, their life together, their dreams of the future that had been so cruelly cut short. Cassidy listened intently, his gaze never wavering, absorbing her grief as if it were his own. In return, he offered glimpses into his past, fragmented memories shrouded in a melancholic haze. He never spoke directly of what haunted him, but Alara sensed a darkness within him, a weight he had carried for far too long. As their connection deepened, Alara found herself drawn to Cassidy in ways she hadn't thought possible. His quiet strength, the unwavering courage he displayed, and the flicker of sadness in his eyes held a strange allure. She longed to know more about him, to understand the shadows that clung to his soul. But a persistent unease lingered, a nagging feeling that kept her heart guarded. Who was Cassidy, really? Where did he come from? And how long would he stay? One moonless night, as they sat by the dying embers of the fireplace, Cassidy's usual reticence seemed to crack. He looked at Alara, his eyes filled with a turmoil she had never witnessed before. "Alara," he began, his voice rough, "there's something you need to know about me." A cold dread washed over Alara. She waited, her heart pounding in her chest, for the revelation she instinctively knew was coming. Cassidy took a deep breath, his gaze dropping to his hands. I was one of them." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Alara's breath caught in her throat. She stared at him, her mind reeling. Try to reconcile the gentle man who had saved her with the brutal image of an outlaw. "What were you saying?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "The gang that attacked your ranch," Cassidy continued, his voice strained. "I was with them." Alara recoiled as if struck. Betrayal pierced her heart, sharper than any bullet. The man who had rescued her, the man she had begun to care for, was one of the very villains who had threatened to destroy her life. But why? The question escaped her lips, a desperate plea for an explanation that would somehow make sense of the impossible. "I joined them to find out when they were going to attack," Cassidy explained, his eyes finally meeting hers, filled with raw pain. "I heard whispers in town. I knew you were in danger. I infiltrated their ranks so I could warn you, protect you." Alara stared at him, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Relief warred with a crushing sense of deception. He had saved her, yes, but his salvation was built upon a foundation of lies. Could she trust anything he had told her? Was his presence here a genuine act of protection? Or was there a deeper, more sinister motive at play? Days turned into a strained silence. Alara found herself constantly watching Cassidy, searching for any flicker of deceit in his eyes. He continued to help her around the ranch, his actions speaking of a quiet devotion, but the shadow of his past hung heavy between them. One evening, as they shared a meager meal, Alara finally broke the silence. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" Cassidy's gaze was filled with regret. "I was afraid that if you knew who I was, what I had done, you would never trust me. And I couldn't bear that." Alara looked at him, her heart aching with confusing mix of anger and a reluctant understanding. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, the quiet desperation for her forgiveness. She knew he had risked everything to save her, but the lies still stung. "What happens now, Cassidy?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's up to you, Alara," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I swear to you my feelings for you are real, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn your trust." Alara looked at him, her heart torn. Could she forgive him? Could she trust a man who had deceived her, even if his intentions had ultimately been to protect her? Was it possible to build a future on a foundation of secrets? As the days turned into weeks, Alara observed Cassidy's actions. He never pressured her, never asked for her forgiveness directly. He simply continued to be there, his quiet strength a constant presence in her life. She saw the way he looked at her, the unspoken tenderness in his gaze, and slowly, hesitantly, the ice around her heart began to thaw. She learned that Cassidy had been forced into the outlaw life by circumstances beyond his control, a past he desperately wanted to leave behind. Meeting Alara had given him a reason to fight for something more, a chance at redemption. One sun-drenched afternoon, as they worked side by side mending a fence, Alara stopped and looked at Cassidy. The lines of worry on his face, the quiet dedication in his movements, touched her deeply. She knew the risk she was taking, but she also knew the truth in her heart. "Cassidy," she said softly. He turned to her, his eyes filled with hopeful uncertainty. I believe you," she said, a small smile gracing her lips. "I believe that you saved me, and I believe that you want to change." A wave of relief washed over Cassidy's face, his eyes shining with an emotion Alara had never seen before. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gently intertwining with hers. Their love story unfolded against the backdrop of the wild, untamed West, a tale woven with threads of deceit and redemption, danger and devotion. The shadows of their past still lingered, but they faced them together, finding solace and strength in each other's arms. In a land where trust was a rare commodity, they had forged a bond that had been tested by fire and tempered by forgiveness. Theirs was a slow-burn love, ignited by a desperate act of courage and destined to face whatever the unforgiving frontier might throw their way. The setting sun cast long shadows across the prairie, hinting at the uncertainties that still lay ahead, but in that moment, their hearts held a fragile, hard-won hope.